Ozzy Osbourne told me he faked his death. Not for the reasons you think, not to escape fame, not to avoid taxes, not to disappear into some peaceful retirement. He faked his death to escape something far worse, a curse that has been killing everyone around him for 50 years. And when he showed me the proof, when he revealed why he contacted me specifically, I realized the most horrifying truth of all. I was not there by accident. I was chosen. And now, whatever has been hunting him is coming for me. It started with a text message from a number I did not recognize. No name, no context, just coordinates and a single line, "Come alone. Tell no one." This is not a joke. I should have deleted it. I should have blocked the number and moved on with my life. But something about those words felt urgent, desperate even. So I plugged the coordinates into my phone and started driving. 3 hours later, I was deep in the mountains of northern Wales, on roads that barely qualified as roads anymore. The GPS signal cut out twice. My phone battery was draining faster than it should have been. The sun was setting, casting everything in this sick orange glow that made the trees look like they were on fire. I almost turned back 4 separate times, but every time I considered it, my phone would buzz. Another message. Keep coming. You are close now. The cabin appeared suddenly, like it had materialized out of the fog itself. Small, wooden, isolated, no other structures for miles, no power lines, no signs of modern life whatsoever. My car headlights swept across the front porch, and that is when I saw him. A figure standing in the doorway, backlit by candlelight. Thin, hunched, waiting. I killed the engine. The silence that followed was absolute. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just my own breathing and the sound of my boots crunching on gravel as I approached. The figure stepped forward into the dying light, and my brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. The long hair, gray now, almost white, the gaunt face, the unmistakable features I had seen on album covers, in documentaries, in news reports about his death 3 years ago. Ozzy Osbourne, alive. He spoke first, and his voice was exactly as I remembered it from interviews. Rough, tired, but aware. "I am sorry you came," he said. "I really am. But I needed someone to know. Before it is too late." He stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter. "Before it finds you." I stood there, frozen. Part of me wanted to run. Part of me thought this was an elaborate prank, some look-alike hired to mess with people. But the look in his eyes was not the look of someone playing a role. It was the look of someone who had not slept properly in years. Someone who had seen things that rewired their brain. "You are not dead," I finally said. Stupid thing to say, but my mind was catching up. "No," he replied. "I am not, but I should be, many, many times over." He disappeared into the cabin, leaving the door open, an invitation, or a trap. I followed him inside. The cabin was smaller than it looked from outside. One main room with a kitchenette, a wood stove, a single bed in the corner. But what dominated the space was the table in the center, covered entirely in papers, photographs, newspaper clippings, a massive leather journal that looked centuries old, candles everywhere, casting shadows that moved wrong, that seemed to lean toward us rather than away from the light. Ozzy sat down heavily in one of 2 chairs. He looked older than his years, like something had been feeding on him from the inside. "You want proof," he said. It was not a question. He slid a photograph across the table. It was him, unmistakably. But the date stamped on the back was from 6 months ago. Long after his public funeral. Long after the tributes and the memorials and the retrospectives. I have been hiding, he continued, his fingers drumming against the table in a nervous rhythm, moving every few months, never staying anywhere long enough to leave a trace, never contacting anyone from my old life, because the moment I do, the moment someone knows I am alive, the clock starts ticking for them. What are you talking about? I asked. My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. He opened the leather journal. The pages were filled with names, hundreds of them, each one followed by a date. Some I recognized, musicians, producers, people who had worked with Black Sabbath. Others were just regular names. But next to each one was the same notation: transferred. And then another date, always within days or weeks of the first. And next to that second date, a single word that made my blood go cold. Deceased. Ozzy looked up at me, and there was something in his expression I had never seen on anyone's face before. Not quite guilt, not quite fear. Something worse. Resignation. I did not fake my death to escape fame, he said quietly. I faked my death to escape a curse, and the only way to break it is to transfer it to someone else, to the last person who sees you alive. He closed the journal, looked me directly in the eyes. So I need you to understand something very clearly. You coming here tonight was not random, but that was just the beginning of what Ozzy was about to reveal. Ozzy stood up and walked to a wooden chest in the corner of the cabin. His movements were slow, deliberate, like a man who had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his head. He pulled out a small black box, ornate and covered in symbols I did not recognize. Symbols that seemed to shift when I looked at them too directly. He placed it on the table between us with a gentleness that felt almost reverent. Or terrified. 1974, he began, settling back into his chair. We were at the height of everything. Black Sabbath was massive. Money, women, drugs, every excess you could imagine. But I wanted more. I was obsessed with the occult, with Aleister Crowley, with the idea that there was real power hidden behind all the stage theatrics and album imagery. Everyone thought it was just an act, but for me it was research. He opened the black box. Inside was a small leather pouch, and inside that something wrapped in black silk. He did not unwrap it, just let me see that it was there. I met a man in London, an antiquarian dealer who specialized in items with dark histories. He told me he had something that belonged to Crowley himself, not just owned by him, but created by him. A ritual object designed for a very specific purpose. Ozzy's hands were shaking now. Immortality through sacrifice, fame through blood, protection through transfer. I stared at the silk-wrapped object. What is it? A bone, he said flatly. A human finger bone carved with sigils, soaked in oils I do not want to know the origin of. The dealer told me Crowley used it in rituals where he would bind protective entities to himself. Demons, spirits, whatever you want to call them. Things that would ensure his survival, his success, his dominance. But the price was always the same. The entity feeds. And if you do not feed it properly, it feeds on you. Ozzy pushed the box away like it burned him. I was high out of my mind when I bought it. Paid £10,000, which was insane money back then. I thought it was brilliant. Thought I was connecting with real power. I took it back to my hotel room that night and performed the ritual exactly as the dealer instructed. Candles arranged in a specific pattern. Words spoken in a language I did not understand. Blood from my palm dripped onto the bone. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Something answered. The candles in the cabin flickered, All of them. At the same time. No breeze, no draft, just a synchronized dimming that made the shadows surge toward us before retreating. Ozzy did not seem to notice, or maybe he was just used to it. I felt it immediately, he continued, like ice water flooding my veins, like something crawling inside my chest and wrapping itself around my heart. I passed out. When I woke up 6 hours later, I felt incredible, energized, invincible, like I could do anything. And for a while, that is exactly what happened. The next album went platinum. Tours sold out. Everything I touched turned to gold. I thought I had cracked the code, thought I had actually done it. He reached for the journal again, flipped to an early page. 3 weeks after the ritual, our sound engineer died. Car accident. Ran off a bridge at high speed. No explanation. He was sober, experienced, knew that road. A week later, one of our roadies overdosed. Never touched hard drugs before in his life. Then a photographer who had been traveling with us had a heart attack at 28 years old. Ozzy's finger traced down the page. More names, more dates, more deaths. I did not connect it at first. We were living fast, dangerous lives. People died in our world. It was tragic, but not unusual. But then I started having the dreams. I would see their faces the night before they died. Always the same dream. They would be standing in darkness, staring at me, and something behind them would reach forward and pull them backward into nothing. They would scream, but no sound would come out, and then they would be gone. He looked up at me with eyes that had seen too much. After the 5th death, I knew. After the 10th, I was certain. The entity I summoned was not protecting me by fighting off threats. It was protecting me by eliminating anyone who got too close. Anyone who could potentially harm me, betray me, or even just inconvenience me. It was interpreting proximity as threat, and it was feeding on their lives to sustain its bond with me. Ozzy slammed the journal shut. I tried everything to stop it. I consulted priests, occultists, spiritualists, anyone who claimed they could help. One of them, a woman in Prague, told me the truth I did not want to hear. The entity cannot be banished. It cannot be destroyed. It is bound to the Crowley bloodline and anyone who activates the ritual. The only way to be free of it is to transfer it to someone else. And the transfer only works under very specific conditions. He leaned forward, and his voice carried a weight that made my stomach drop. The entity must believe you are dead, and the last person to see you alive becomes the new host. What Ozzy told me next made me understand why he had been hiding for 3 years. Ozzy pulled out a separate folder from beneath the journal. This one bulging with papers that looked like they had been collected obsessively over decades. Newspaper clippings yellowed with age, printed obituaries, handwritten notes with dates and locations. Medical examiner reports that he should not have had access to. He spread them across the table like a dealer laying out cards, and I realized I was looking at a map of death that stretched across 40 years. I started documenting everything in 1976, he said, his finger hovering over the earliest clipping. Once I understood what was happening, I needed to see the pattern, needed to know if there were rules, if there was any way to predict it or control it. He laughed, but there was no humor in it, just a hollow, broken sound. Turns out, the entity has very consistent habits, almost methodical, like it was designed this way. He pointed to a cluster of deaths from the late 70s. These were crew members, people who traveled with us, who were around me constantly. They started dying in ways that made no sense. A lighting technician electrocuted despite following every safety protocol. a bus driver who wrapped the vehicle around a tree on a straight road in perfect weather, a security guard who drowned in his own bathtub. Ozzy's voice was mechanical now, reciting facts to distance himself from the horror. Every single one of them died within 72 hours of me having what I called an episode. An episode? I asked. The warning signs, he said. 3 days before someone dies, I start experiencing symptoms. It begins with the dreams, always the same. I see their face in darkness, and the thing behind them reaches forward. But then it gets physical. I wake up with nosebleeds. My vision blurs. I hear whispers in languages I do not speak. And I get this feeling. He pressed his hand against his chest, this overwhelming dread, like my heart is being squeezed by a frozen fist. It lasts for exactly 3 days. And then, someone dies. He pulled out a calendar marked with red X's. Dozens of them. I tested it. Kept detailed records. The timeline never varied. 3 days of symptoms, then death. And it was always someone I had recently interacted with. Someone I had spoken to, stood near, made eye contact with. Proximity was the trigger. The entity scans everyone in my orbit and selects the one it perceives as the biggest threat. I looked at the names again. Some of them I recognized from music history. A producer who had worked on one of their most famous albums found dead from an apparent suicide despite having no history of depression. A journalist who had interviewed Ozzy extensively, killed in a mugging gone wrong in a safe neighborhood. But most of the names were ordinary people. A hotel clerk, a taxi driver, a waitress, people whose only crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The worst part, Ozzy said, and his voice cracked, is that I started recognizing the pattern before it happened. I would meet someone, have a normal conversation, and then that night the dreams would start. And I would know that in 3 days they would be gone. And there was nothing I could do to stop it. He pulled out a photograph that made my blood run cold. It was taken at what looked like a charity event in the early 90s. Ozzy was shaking hands with a young woman, both of them smiling for the camera. But there was another figure in the background, blurred and dark, standing directly behind the woman. Its shape was wrong, too tall, too thin, and it seemed to be leaning over her shoulder. I did not see it when the photo was taken, Ozzy said. Found it years later when I was going through old press materials. That woman died 2 days after this event. Fell down an elevator shaft. Doors opened, elevator was not there. She stepped forward and just dropped 8 floors. He tapped the dark figure in the background. That is what I see in my dreams. That is the thing that has been following me for 50 years. The documentation got worse as it progressed through the decades. The deaths became more frequent as Ozzy's fame grew. More people around him, more interactions, more opportunities for the entity to feed. He showed me evidence of deaths that happened during recording sessions, during tours, during public appearances. A fan who won a meet and greet contest and died in a car accident driving home. A radio host who interviewed him and suffered a fatal aneurysm live on air 3 days later. A fellow musician who collaborated on a track and overdosed despite being clean for years. I tried isolation, Ozzy said, his hands gripping the edge of the table. Fired my entire crew. Stopped touring. Refused interviews. Locked myself away in my house for months at a time. But it did not stop. The mailman died. The gardener died. A neighbor I waved to died. The entity does not care about my intentions. It only cares about proximity, about protecting me from anything and anyone that might pose even a theoretical threat. He pulled out the most recent documents, deaths from the 2010s. His assistant, his personal chef, a cleaning service worker. I watched myself become a plague. Everyone around me was a ticking time bomb. I could not have friends, could not have relationships, could not trust anyone to be near me without signing their death warrant. His eyes met mine, and I saw something there that terrified me more than anything else. Calculation. Purpose. That is when I realized the only solution. I had to die. Officially. Publicly. Completely. And the way he planned his death was more horrifying than I could have imagined. Ozzy walked to a filing cabinet that looked like it had been salvaged from some abandoned office building. He pulled out a thick binder, and when he dropped it on the table, dust exploded into the air. The cover was marked with a single word in faded ink: research. I spent 15 years tracking down everyone who claimed to know anything about Crowley's rituals, he said, flipping it open. Occultists in Eastern Europe, demonologists in South America, monastery archives in Tibet. I paid a fortune to people who operated in shadows, who dealt in knowledge that is not supposed to exist. The pages were filled with diagrams, incantations written in various languages, photographs of ancient texts, and handwritten translations. But what caught my attention were the notes scrawled in the margins. Ozzy's handwriting. Frantic and desperate. Failed. Does not work. Made it worse. Another death. I tried everything to break the curse, he continued. Exorcisms performed by 3 different religious orders. Binding spells from a witch in New Orleans who claimed she could trap the entity in a mirror. I even attempted a counter ritual using Crowley's own writings, thinking I could reverse what I had done. He pointed to a page marked with a large red X. That one killed 4 people in a single week. The entity interpreted my attempt to remove it as an attack. It retaliated. He sat back down heavily, but one woman, a scholar in Prague who had spent her entire life studying Crowley's work, she finally gave me the truth. She was the only one who understood what I had actually summoned. She called it a revenant pact. An entity that exists solely to preserve its host at any cost. It is not a demon, not a ghost. It is something older, something that predates modern occultism. Crowley did not create it. He just found a way to bind it. Ozzy pulled out a page covered in symbols that hurt to look at. They seemed to vibrate on the paper, like they were slightly out of phase with reality. The Revenant Pact has 3 absolute rules. First, it cannot be destroyed or banished by any known means. It exists outside conventional spiritual hierarchies. Second, it cannot be starved. If you try to isolate yourself completely, it will create circumstances that force interaction. It will orchestrate encounters. It will manipulate events to ensure it continues feeding. And third, he paused, and the weight of what he was about to say pressed down on the room like a physical force. It can only be transferred to a new host under one specific condition. The host must be legally, publicly, and spiritually dead, he said. And the final person to see them alive becomes the new carrier. But here is the part that makes it truly diabolical. The entity must believe the death is real. You cannot fake it and have the entity know. It has to be convinced that its current host has been severed from the mortal world completely. Otherwise, the transfer fails. The curse returns, and it punishes you for trying. He showed me another section of the binder. Reports of people throughout history who had attempted to pass on similar curses. A nobleman in 16th century France who staged his own hanging. only to have the curse return and wipe out his entire household. A merchant in Victorian London who faked a drowning, and the entity killed everyone who attended his fake funeral. Every failed transfer has the same result, Ozzy said. The entity comes back stronger, hungrier, more aggressive, and it takes everyone you tried to involve in the deception. My mouth was dry. So how do you convince it? You commit, he said simply. You do not fake your death. You orchestrate it so thoroughly, so completely, that even you start to believe it. Legal death certificates, a funeral with a body, media coverage, public mourning. You have to die in every way except the actual biological sense. And then, in that window between your public death and the entity realizing you are still breathing, you present yourself to one final person, the last witness, and the curse transfers to them at sunrise the following day. He opened the journal again to a section I had not seen. Pages filled with names crossed out. I tried to transfer it 7 times before I staged my death. Each time, I thought I had found the right person. Someone isolated. Someone who would not be missed. Someone who... He stopped, unable to finish. They all died within 72 hours, and the entity came back to me. Because I was still alive in the world's eyes. The entity knew. Ozzy looked at me with an expression that made my skin crawl. So I had to truly die. I had to burn every bridge, erase every connection, become a ghost in a world that believed I was already gone. But what he told me about his staged death revealed something far more calculated than I expected. Ozzy pulled out a laptop that looked ancient, covered in stickers, and held together with electrical tape. He opened it and turned the screen toward me. A news article. Rock legend Ozzy Osbourne dead at 74. The date was 3 years ago. I remembered when it happened. The tributes, the memorial concerts, the documentaries celebrating his life. It had felt real because it was supposed to. I spent 2 years planning this, he said, scrolling through folders filled with documents. Forged medical records, bank transfers to offshore accounts, communications with people whose names were redacted. I needed it to be absolutely airtight. No loose ends, no questions, no possibility of anyone discovering the truth. Because if even one person suspected I was alive before the transfer was complete, the entity would know. And it would kill everyone involved. He clicked on a video file, security footage from what looked like a private hospital. The timestamp showed a date 1 week before his public death. I watched as Ozzy was wheeled into a room by medical staff, hooked up to machines, placed under what appeared to be intensive care. I paid a team of doctors $500,000 each, he explained. Specialists who operated in moral gray zones. They sedated me for 4 days, induced a state that mimicked death closely enough that all the standard tests would show failure. Flat EEG. No measurable brain activity. Body temperature dropped. For 96 hours, I was medically dead in every way that mattered. The video switched to another angle. Family members I recognized from photographs entering the room, weeping over his body. They thought it was real, Ozzy said quietly, my own family. I could not tell them, could not risk them knowing, because the entity would sense the deception through them. So I let them grieve, let them believe I was gone. He showed me death certificates signed by real doctors, autopsy reports that detailed organ failure consistent with decades of substance abuse, cremation paperwork processed through legitimate channels. But there was no body in that crematorium, he said. The ashes they scattered were from an unclaimed corpse, similar age and build, purchased through channels I will not describe. Everything was documented. Everything was official. The world believed I was dead because, on paper, I was. The funeral footage came next. Thousands of people. Celebrities giving eulogies, a coffin lowered into the ground at a cemetery I recognized. That coffin had weight, Ozzy said, filled with sandbags and personal items to make it convincing. The entity was watching. I could feel it. It was there at my own funeral, trying to understand what had happened, searching for me. And for the first time in 50 years, it could not find me. He closed the laptop. I woke up 3 days after the funeral in a facility in Switzerland, off the grid, run by people who specialize in making individuals disappear. New identity, new passport, new life. I was legally dead in every country on earth, and that is when I felt it leave me. Ozzy's hand went to his chest, pressing against his heart. The frozen fist that had been squeezing me for decades just released. The whispers stopped. The dreams stopped. I could breathe fully for the first time since 1974. I slept for 16 hours straight without waking up screaming. It was gone. The entity had accepted my death and detached itself, but his expression darkened. For 11 months, I was free. I lived in hiding, moving between safe houses, never staying anywhere long enough to leave a trace. But I was alive in a way I had not been in half a century. No death dreams, no warnings, no corpses in my wake. I thought maybe, just maybe, I had actually beaten it, that the curse had simply dissolved when it lost its host. He stood and walked to the window, staring out into the darkness beyond. Then the symptoms came back. 11 months and 4 days after my public death, I woke up with blood pouring from my nose. The whispers returned. And that night, I had the dream again. But this time, the face I saw was not someone I knew. It was someone I had never met. Someone who worked at a grocery store I had visited exactly once, wearing a disguise, paying in cash. I did not even speak to them, just handed them money, made brief eye contact. That was enough. His reflection in the window looked haunted. They found her body 3 days later, gas leak in her apartment. And I understood the horrifying truth. The entity had not dissolved. It had been searching, scanning, waiting for me to interact with the world again. And the moment I did, the moment I was proximate to another living person, it reactivated. It had bonded to me so deeply that death was not enough. It would follow me forever, unless I completed the transfer. Ozzy turned back to face me, and his eyes held a truth that made my heart stop. That is when I started looking for you. But why me specifically was about to become devastatingly clear. Ozzy walked to the back of the cabin and pulled aside a heavy curtain I had not noticed before. Behind it was a door. He opened it to reveal a small room that made my stomach turn. Every wall was covered floor to ceiling with photographs, documents, and strings connecting different pieces of information, like some nightmare detective board. But this was not investigating a crime. This was selecting a victim. I spent 8 months researching candidates, he said, stepping into the room. The entity requires specific conditions for a successful transfer, and I had to find someone who met every single one. He gestured to different sections of the wall. Isolated. No close family ties. Someone who would not be immediately missed if they started exhibiting strange behavior. Someone with minimal social media presence, limited digital footprint. Someone who had recently experienced significant life changes that would explain sudden disappearances or personality shifts. My eyes scanned the wall, and my blood went cold. There were photos of me, dozens of them, taken over months without my knowledge. Walking to my car, buying groceries, sitting alone at a coffee shop, entering my apartment building. The timestamps showed careful, methodical surveillance going back nearly a year. "You moved to a new city 6 months ago," Ozzy said, pointing to a document that showed my lease agreement. "How did he have that?" "Left behind everyone you knew. Started a job that is fully remote. Your parents are deceased. No siblings. Your social circle consists of casual acquaintances. No deep friendships. You live alone. You have a history of insomnia and anxiety that would provide cover for the symptoms you are about to experience." He pulled out a folder with my name on it. Inside were printouts of my medical records, my employment history, my bank statements, every detail of my life cataloged and analyzed. "You are perfect," he said, and the word made me want to vomit. "You check every single requirement, and more importantly, you have something the entity will recognize as a continuation. You have proximity to darkness." "What does that mean?" I asked, but my voice barely worked. Ozzy pulled out another document. A police report from 7 years ago, an incident I had never told anyone about. An accident that was not entirely an accident. Someone had died because of a choice I made, and I had spent years trying to forget it. "The entity feeds on death," he said, "and it gravitates toward hosts who have already touched it in some way. You carry that weight. That makes the transfer smoother, more natural." I backed toward the door, but Ozzy held up a hand. "Wait, you need to see the rest." He pointed to another section of the wall. Photographs of other people, different faces, different lives, all of them crossed out with red marker. These were the other candidates, 12 of them, each one carefully selected. Each one approached in subtle ways to test compatibility. "What happened to them?" I asked, though I already knew. "They died," he said flatly. "Not from the transfer, from proximity. Because I was still carrying the entity while I was researching. Every time I got close enough to surveil someone, to study them, to confirm they were suitable, the entity marked them as potential threats. 3 days later, they were gone. Accidents, medical emergencies, violence from seemingly random sources. I was murdering people just by considering them." He tapped my photograph. "But you were different. I studied you for 3 months before the symptoms started, longer than any of the others. And when the death dreams finally came, when I saw your face in the darkness, something changed. The entity did not take you immediately. It waited, like it was evaluating, like it recognized you as a viable new host and wanted to preserve the option." Ozzy opened the journal to the last written page. My name was there, written in fresh ink. And next to it, a date. Today's date. "I brought you here because the transfer window is open." Right now. The entity has accepted you as the next carrier. All that remains is the final step. You have to be the last person to see me alive. And at sunrise, which is in 4 hours, the curse will leave me and attach itself to you. I tried to speak, but he was not finished. And before you think about running, before you think about fighting, you need to understand something crucial. The shadows in the room began moving independently of the candlelight. I lunged for the front door, but my hand passed through the handle like it was made of smoke. I tried again. Same result. The wood was solid when I pounded on it, but the handle, the lock, every means of opening it simply was not there anymore. "What did you do?" I screamed at Ozzy. He had not moved from his position. "The cabin is prepared," he said calmly, warded with the same sigils from Crowley's ritual. Once you crossed the threshold, the space sealed itself. You cannot leave until sunrise, until the transfer completes. I ran to the windows, tried to smash through them. My fist bounced off the glass like it was made of steel. Outside, the darkness had become absolute. No stars, no moon, just infinite black pressing against the windows like something alive. "You cannot trap me here," I shouted. "I am not trapping you," Ozzy replied. "The entity is. It has already begun bonding to you. If you somehow manage to escape right now, you would still receive the curse at sunrise. But you would receive it without understanding it, without preparation, without any chance of survival." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit down. Let me give you what I never had. Knowledge. Time. A choice. I had no options. My phone had no signal. The walls were solid. The door was impossible. I collapsed into the chair, my mind racing through every possible escape that did not exist. "What choice?" I finally asked. "You have already decided this." Ozzy slid the journal across the table. "You can do what I did. You can learn the rules. You can eventually stage your own death and transfer it to someone else. Continue the cycle." He paused. "Or you can try to break it. There are theories I never tested, possibilities I was too afraid to attempt. The woman in Prague mentioned something before she died. A way to potentially starve the entity by rejecting the protection it offers, by deliberately putting yourself in mortal danger repeatedly until it exhausts itself trying to save you. That is not a choice," I said. "That is just different ways to die." "Yes," Ozzy agreed, "but one way you die alone after destroying countless others. The other way you die trying to end this. And maybe, just maybe, you succeed where I failed." He stood and walked to the window. The darkness outside was moving now, rippling like water. "Sunrise is in 3 hours. I suggest you start reading." The first page of the journal detailed exactly how to identify your next victim. I am recording this 6 months after that night. The transfer happened exactly as Ozzy said it would. At sunrise, I felt something crawl inside my chest and wrap around my heart with fingers made of ice. Ozzy collapsed. I do not know if he survived. I ran from that cabin and never looked back. The dream started 3 weeks later. I have killed 4 people so far. I see their faces every night. But I am not continuing the cycle. I am not looking for my replacement. Instead, I am doing something Ozzy never had the courage to do. I am documenting everything publicly, posting it everywhere, making myself visible, because I realized something he did not. The entity transfers through the last person to see you alive. But what if thousands of people see you at once? What if millions do? The entity cannot transfer to everyone simultaneously. It cannot choose. So if you are watching this, you have seen me. You are all the last witnesses now. And when I die, which will be soon because I can feel it eating me from the inside, the curse will have nowhere to go. It will try to transfer to all of you at once and tear itself apart in the process. I am sorry for what is coming. But maybe this is how it finally ends.